Talking again about sports writing, I want to talk about the baseball novels of John Tunis. John Tunis was a major writer in the 40s and 50s of novels about sports, usually baseball, and these were these were considered pretty aspirational novels for youth. Like he was considered a top writer of novels for youth, and I'm not sure if he himself actually enjoyed that distinction, the distinction between fiction for children and fiction for adults was a little different back then. In any case, they're very successful. He wrote quite a lot of them, I think upwards of 15 or 20, and somehow I got a hold of these. I think they're all out of print. They've been remembered in various ways, and they did come back into print in the 90s. Maybe it was at the library. The emblematic one, the one that I think kind of got it all rolling, was called The Kid from Tompkinsville. Kid from Tompkinsville is it's really well done, and it's a there's a lot going on. There's a lot of hooks into what was going on in American culture, then and now, as it were. If Zane Grey's The Shortstop was sort of a pulp romance, a melodrama with sports as the setting for like a young man's rise to success in the world, and then Ring Lardner's sports fiction were like these sort of like parodies and these sort of little chunks of the human comedy that used sports as a convenient background for character. John Tunis's baseball novels, which pretty much all follow the pattern of The Kid from Tompkinsville, are sports as sort of serious moral challenge, a serious moral and ethical challenge, drama, reasonably high drama. Um, the Kid from Tompkinsville, and there are a lot of there's some fairly distinctly American forms to it. Kid from Tompkinsville is about a young man named Roy Tucker, who is a pitcher in his local league. He's a skilled one. He's scouted by the Brooklyn Dodgers, and as you get 19, 20, he's brought to spring training from this small town Tompkinsville, which he's never really left in his whole life. He's like the classic rookie. He hasn't even he hasn't been to college. He's lived in this small town with his grandmother. His parents are dead. He's gone to school. He's studied. He's played baseball. He's had a job. This sort of thing, and he gets sent to spring training, and he pretty much has left to rise or fall by his own devices right from the start. The spring training is presented as competitive, which I think is pretty true then and now. He doesn't join a well-knit team that welcomes him. He sort of has to prove himself right away, which he does. He's very good, and he makes the team. He has a few friendly words of advice from a veteran catcher, but who sort of means well and isn't threatened by his arrival because he's on his way out of his career anyway, and catches well for him and sort of helps him ease into the role. He steps into the season and has a fantastic start. He's a phenom. He's winning games left and right. I think he goes on some long run of wins that really holds the team in competition. But it's not a happy team. The manager doesn't form them into a unit. There's squabbling. There's showboating. Things aren't good. He's performing okay, but he's not performing well with a team that's performing well around him. And then midway through the year, he injures his arm really badly. He can throw, but he can't pitch. Pitching, it's unusual artificial motion to get that much on the ball, and he's basically told he'll never pitch again. The Dodgers, he can hit okay. This is back in the 30s and 40s. A young man, the pitchers could occasionally hit. Back then, a few pitchers back then made a point of being decent hitters, and Roy's one of them. So the Dodgers keep him around. They like, they're grateful to him for playing. You get the feeling they're grateful to him for playing so well. So they let him work out the year, and they occasionally send him in to pinch hit at key moments where he does okay or doesn't. But it's left at the end of the year with the clear implication that his professional career could easily be over, and that he might just have to return home to Tompkinsville and live a normal life like all the rest of us. No more bright lights, no more fame by association with America's pastime, no more of this exceptionalism. He does not stand for this lying down. He decides to reinvent himself as a hitter and to study hitting and take it seriously. And he goes home to his grandmother's. He gets his job back at the A&P or whatever, and he sets himself to become a major league professional hitter. He studies hitting. He builds like some training contraptions that he does, and he just does it all winter long. Teaches himself a new swing, teaches himself to spot curveballs, this kind of thing. And he doesn't know if he's going to get invited to spring training, but he lets the Dodgers know he would like to be invited to spring training, and they do. They bring him out. I think it's like a courtesy. All it costs them really is a bus ticket. You get the impression they don't really expect to carry him over, but he was pretty good. They bring him in as a hitter, and again he hits the ground running really well. Like lots of hits, lots of homers. He's pulling the game together. The old catcher who was his friendly face the previous year is now the manager. He's got ideas about how to get the team back together. He and the owner of the Dodgers sort of get the team pulled together. They make some trades. They rely on putting Roy into the outfield now as a successful hitter, which a lot of people think is silly. The last year's rookie phenom pitcher is now going to be their center fielder, but okay. And they sort of battle their way, into competition. They fight their way up the league. This is back when baseball only had two leagues, the National League and the American League, and you had to win the league if you were going to make another World Series. There was no more elaborate playoffs than that. So each team's odds were worse of making it than they are into the playoffs than they are now. You had to be the best of 8 teams, which is not easy. It was harder to put a dynasty together under some, perhaps. That's debatable. In any case, they have a hard fight. Roy has become a total baseball hound of he's actively trying to learn everything he can. He sits next to the manager and asks him about the situation on the field. He's trying to show that kind of sustained attention to his craft that he sort of can tell this will demand. He faces some challenges. He sets up a couple of clever moves with other players on other teams that pay off, and it all comes down to this final game where he's on the outfield and he has to make a long running catch to win the game that will see the Dodgers go into the World Series. He has to make this long running catch that'll send him right into the outfield wall. He can't slow down. There's no time, and so he catches the ball, crashes into the wall, and the book ends with his grandmother listening to the game on the radio, hearing that the ball's caught and that the Dodgers won the pennant and are going to the World Series, but not knowing, Roy, we leave the book with Roy lying there on the field, hurt again, in the sort of parallel to the injury that ended his pitching career. So it's a pretty well put together book. It has a nice arc to the character. We follow Roy closely. He's a character that a lot of people from the time then and now can identify with, because he's a good guy. He's just a good guy. He's a good guy who wants to do something difficult very well as he can, and he wants to learn from it. He doesn't have any big uh, he doesn't have any big hang-ups about anything. He doesn't have any big problems with anything. He's simply trying to be the best baseball player that he can, and he's figuring things out sort of one step at a time. He's a fairly neutral character. Even the fact that he's lost his parents, it does not like overshadow his life. He doesn't have like a we don't learn his opinions about things. He's pretty narrowly focused on making baseball his life, growing into the whole field of baseball at that moment when you're testing out as a young person. Can I make a life out of this? Is this going to be my life? So making the team, being a successful player, coming back from an injury, reinventing yourself as a pitcher or as a batter, making the team again, learning more about your game, learning about how to work as a team instead of just focusing on your own hitting, and then risking yourself again, even after risking yourself almost took you out of the sport, risking yourself again when it's the right thing to do in the game at that time. These are like sort of the steps that carry him through the book. What makes the book really compelling is, and maybe this feels like something that is distinctly American, is just how alone he is. He is such the lonely individual. He gets basically no help from anybody. He gets a word or two from the catcher turned manager character Dave Leonard here and there, but just like these tiny nudges. And everyone else on the team is sort of like that too. It's this assumption that everyone is kind of in it, for and of themselves, and they have to work it out for and of themselves. So when he's injured, there's no plan for dealing with him. He's just out. It's kind of like the jungle. They just pitch him to the side. Pretty close. When he has a plan to reinvent himself as a batter, he has to figure this all out himself. He has to build these training equipment himself. There's no one to call on back at his hometown. People there are kind of content to see him as, oh, he's the kid who went off and played and then he got hurt and now he's come back into town. His grandmother is not going to stop him, but she's also not like really supportive of it. She's scared of the work involved, and it becomes a pretty good analog for just success in economic life, American style. You're pretty much on your own. You can expect very little support. You kind of have to figure things out, and no one's going to give you a lot of hints. And if you make a major misstep, hey, that's just kind of too bad. There are people that think stuff happens, and no one's going to go out of their way to help you. In other books, too, this has brought out. There's certain major themes of all the John Tunis books. The Kid from Tompkinsville is the emblematic one, and there are others though that then move on to develop other characters. Roy remains a character, but he's not always the main one. And there's scenes, for example, where some of the players are negotiating for their salary with the owner of the team. This is when being a baseball player was like just an okay job. It was not $1 million. It was like an all right, lower middle class living. And they are negotiating. They've sort of settled on a figure, and they have no help. No, they get no help from the other players who don't even want to talk about it, just the way Americans often don't like to talk about what they make in terms of their salary. They have no lawyer, there's no union, it's just them and the owner, and it's kind of presented as just like a contest of wills, pure wills. So when the main character gets the raise that he wants in this scene, I'm thinking of, it's just this guy named in the book's named Spike Russell. He's the shortstop on the team who then also becomes the manager. Um, this is seen as like sort of a bit of a personal triumph for him by just kind of being a hard-nosed negotiator. But I can't help but also think, man, he had to go all that trouble and risk his whole shot just for like 500 lousy bucks a year. I don't know, something about that is very, uh, there's no sense in the books that it's that baseball players should be like too concerned with money, right? Like that would somehow be kind of gauche. It's okay for Spike to want to get a decent raise out of it and to get what he's worth, but there's no sense that like the owners are owners and players are players, and that's just kind of like the natural order of things. And it's good to stand up for yourself like Spike did, but there's no sense of like concern for like the overall economics of the sport or the pressures of the sport, or whether things are organized well to like protect everybody's interests. That's just not a thing in these books. In these books, players play. They're not saints or anything, but fundamentally they play because they love the game.
Dad,
And
what are you doing?
oh, I'm doing one of my book talks, honey. I talk about books.
Be quiet,
It's okay. And this is sort of seen as like the right thing. It's like your main concern is to do the job well, and then later to make sure that you get, decent compensation for it. And this is the point that really interests me, is the limits of the John Tunis book. Because I think they're extremely common limits in American life. A sense of like the limits of proper activity, proper action. And this idea that you just, do your job as well as you can towards the desired goal, that if kind of we all did that, there would be no need for collective action or dispute over values, that just sort of a single-minded devotion to our work would, whatever it be, that just the pursuit of excellence in our work would kind of prevent all such problems from coming to be, and then they wouldn't require any resolution. I recall the conservative columnist George Will, in one of his books, he often liked to use baseball as an analog for experience, and he wrote a book about it called Men at Work, which right there in the title tells you something about what it's about. But near the end, he wrote something like, I believe that if we all did our jobs as well and devotedly as like Tony La Russa managed and Dennis Eckersley pitched, like the players and managers in the book, then we would have no more problems in America. And I think this is both kind of correct and deeply flawed. I certainly agree with the value of like doing your work well and pursuing excellence that are presented by the kid from Tompkinsville and the other novels. That is an essential quality. That is the single-minded devotion part, perhaps not so much. In a couple of the books, there's one called High Pockets, where there's a character who's joined the team, and he's very, very good, but he's too single-mindedly focused on his own achievement. He focuses just on his hitting, his play. He's not aware enough of the team as a whole, and he also has to sort of learn it. It's not one of the better books. He has to learn a sort of a moral lesson about how his play is meaningful to the wider community. So he has like he has some kind of like this is before the Make-A-Wish Foundation, but he has some kind of Make-A-Wish thing where a sick child wants to meet him, and seeing the kid's courage in dealing with this illness sort of readjusts his orientation and makes him see the importance of not just being the best batter, but actually like winning games, and winning the pennant, and supporting the fans and this kind of thing. It's not one of the better books, but it does show Tunis is aware of how baseball is a team sport, and if we only pursue our individual excellence, that's not enough. We need to pursue our individual excellence in concert with awareness of the overall goal, which is to win games, win the pennant, win the World Series. One thing that sports books offers is these defined goals, which in regular human life are far more ambiguous. You can tell people really like artificially limited achievements, like getting the gold medal in the Olympics, winning a certain award, winning a certain prize. They really like them because you either do it or you don't. Whereas if you try to achieve more nebulous values in your life, that are not sort of commodified, who's to say if you've done it enough? Have you been kind enough? Have you been active in your community enough? These sorts of things. There's no end to them. So by creating, like, in the World Series, winning the World Series as like the goal, or the Stanley Cup or what have you, sports fiction gives us some of the pleasure that they do it or they don't. It gives us some of the pleasure of seeing, like, the work finished, because it's not going to be finished. We're going to perish and leave this life with tons and tons and tons and tons of things unfinished, dreams we've had that may not arrive for centuries, if then. And so the achievable goals take on a sort of a newer and brighter resonance for a lot of people, because they offer something that's like more like stamped in metal, like gonna last. I got this book published. I got this into the the National Register of Historic Places. I did this. They're gonna remember this. This is in the paper. This sort of thing. So Tunis offers that. Tunis offers that pleasure that you can experience vicariously through his fiction of people achieving, set limited goals, which are sort of stand-ins for the values that they represent. The value of winning the World Series in Tunis's books is not, it's not monetary, for sure. It's never mentioned, even though players back then would have gotten a bonus for winning the World Series. Not to mention, endorsements and that kind of thing. It's not fame. They're already pretty famous. It's more just like, this is what we do it all for. It's like the spiritual, the culmination, the spiritual culmination of the sport is to succeed at the very highest level of the sport against the very highest level of opposition, which is fine, which is fair. And there are these touches of, it means something like to the wider community. But what you don't get in the Tunis fiction, and what you often don't get in discussions of American life and values, is enough attention and respect paid to the work of simply making it possible for the athletic competitions to take place. There's a great focus on being in them and on winning them or losing them or getting better or getting worse on the challenge, but there isn't enough attention paid to the overall context and the work involved in making them take place. So, for example, there's no hero umpires. A little bit of attention is occasionally paid by the players to the people who sort of do work around them, managers, coaches. They're aware that there's an owner, and he isn't represented as he's not a robber baron, and he's just kind of like a character who wants the team to succeed because it's his team, but they don't stress that. They don't stress that the owners have an interest. There's no sense that baseball as a whole is in competition with other leisure activities for customers, for fans, for markets. There isn't that sense of the wider ecosystem, which needs care and maintenance. And I think the same thing is a problem for George Will's statement, which is if we all just did our jobs well, all these problems would go away. Like if we all just did our jobs really, really excellently. That's not true. A lot of the jobs we do are poor jobs or perhaps unnecessary jobs. A lot of the jobs conflict with other people's jobs, such that if I do my work excellently, it makes it harder for someone else to do their work excellently. We exist in a joint state that has to be maintained and regulated. For example, baseball would break down as a game if it got too violent, if pitchers were throwing at the batters, for more than once every few months or something like that, the game would fall apart. It would be impossible to play. There have to be rules that regulate the sport itself, and people have to discuss the rules and debate them. Not enough credit in general is given to the people who take the trouble. The umpires, the rules setters, the regulators, there is not enough credit given to how they make it possible for people to play games. And in this case, games would be, anything in the business of life. And because there's this intense focus, we get all these people trying to be players and trying to create achievement without just expecting the wider system to simply work. And when the wider system comes up with major problems, they get very, very frustrated because they just want to play. They just want to play the game. They want to get better at the game. They want to do the game. They want it to be set up so they can keep doing the game. The game in this case, in Tunis's fiction, it's a literal game, but it could be anything here: baseball, religion, cultural practices, family practices. When they conflict with other systems, something has to be done to manage it. And when people look only inwards into the inward work of the game, they leave the management of these things to others who they either grow increasingly simply, even if they sort of feel like they're on their side, they don't really understand kind of how they think, and that leads to a real deep lack of trust. In Tunis's fiction, the players just assume that these things are going to work. Baseball bats will be there when they need them. The grounds will be kept. The fans will show up. The umpires will mostly be neutral. They just assume it. And because they assume it, to some degree, that probably does help these things actually happen. But it means if they were ever not to happen, they wouldn't really know what to do because they have focused so solely upon play. I imagine young people reading these books in the 40s and 50s and growing up to adulthood under their star of those books, under the star of self-improvement, excellence in play, pursuit for its own end. Yes, you get some fame and monetary reward, but that's not why you do it. That just sort of comes along with it. This is not the worst. This is not a bad ethic by any means, but it might be incomplete. There needs to be some awareness of the wider forces that allow you to play, and some respect for when the people who are sort of in charge of those wider forces, or at least are monitoring them, when they send you messages about how things are going. I talked in an earlier talk about Zane Grey's book, The Shortstop, which is much more juvenile than Tunis's fiction. They're much more sillily written, they're more scattershot. But you know what they do have, better than Tunis? They do have some awareness that the athletes are part of a wider community, and that the reputation of their whole sport is important, and that what they offer the community in terms of sort of release and entertainment and drama needs to fit into that community. So even though it's written in a much more juvenile fashion, it does have a broader scope than the Tunis sort of narrowly focused self-improvement ethic. So it's interesting to watch this stuff emerge, and you get to that so common in the U.S. Pattern of a person who has their head down, like Roy Tucker, focused on a goal, pursuing it, working hard, suddenly looking up and not understanding what they see and not liking what they see, only seeing that it is interfering with their play, and sort of going tilt on it